Hi, I'm Simon. I'm a counsellor based in Oxford, and this video is on anti-trans propaganda. And what I mean by that is that I see a lot of anti-trans posts on social media, I see articles on the news, I see threats about trans people coming to get us. And a lot of these articles use logical fallacies, particularly the strawman, which heavily demonises the average trans person who probably just wants to be left alone. So I'm going to talk about that and maybe some other issues where there is oppression in the media to give you a little bit more of an open mind about what actually might be going on. To give some context why a lot of this anti-trans rhetoric is coming up, on the 16th of April, the UK Supreme Court made an ever so slight change to the Equality Act, which governs the characteristics that are protected against discrimination, whether that be direct, like harassment, or indirect. Gender reassignment is one of those 7 characteristics, as is sex. And the change said that sex, or gender, means the sex that you phenotypically were at birth. And I don't have a legal background to be able to thoroughly discuss the ramifications, the legal applications, or the discrimination that this subtle change has brought about, but it has meant that trans people's gender isn't being recognised, even if they've actually got a gender recognition certificate, which I think is partly what has spiked a lot of this anti-trans propaganda, on top of the strawmans I'm going to discuss in a second. So, logical fallacies are errors in reasoning that undermine the logic of an argument. A strawman argument either oversimplifies it, or it creates an extreme exaggeration of the argument, and then rather than logically arguing with the point itself, it argues against this extreme simplified version and defeats it with ease, appearing as though the argument is sound when actually you've just sidestepped the point. So to example this, I want you to imagine that I set up a boxing match between you and Mike Tyson. The winner of this match is going to get a fantastic prize, but you're up against Mike Tyson and you're probably going to lose because he has a shed ton of experience. Gets to the day of the match itself, and I give you an option. You can either fight Mike Tyson and probably get the crap beaten out of you and lose all of the prize money, or alternatively, I've got a straw man, a scarecrow, that I have dressed up to look a little bit like Mike Tyson, and you can fight the scarecrow, and if you beat the scarecrow, you'll still get the prize money, and people will go, wow, he just beat Mike Tyson. So, sure enough, it comes to the match itself, you get up on stage and boom, you smash this scarecrow to pieces, there's straw going everywhere. You win the boxing match, and people go, amazing. You must be better at boxing than Mike Tyson. When the reality is, you've not won an argument at all, it was a straw man. Another example, let's say I say to you that every single item in the Tesco superstore needs to have a security label. There are thieves coming in and taking things, so every Freddo, every bottle of beer, every can of soup needs to have a security label that beep beep beeps on the way out, because then we will stop the thieves. And you say to me, actually Simon, I think that's really disproportionate. I think most people aren't thieves, and anyway they increase the prices to take into account pilfering, and I say to you, aha, you must be one of those thieves. It's a straw man. We're not arguing about whether or not we should put labels, security labels on products. I've taken to it extreme and said that if you disagree with me, you must be a thief. I notice a lot of similar straw men in the gender critical movement, the movement that is anti-trans. And the first one I see quite a lot argues that trans people are trying to get into the bathroom that they don't belong in. The argument is effectively saying that trans people are sex offenders. And the way I phrase that sounds ludicrous, doesn't it? Who thinks that every trans person is a sex offender? You'll see articles which go over examples of somebody who might be a sex offender and has disputed their gender to try and get away with it. But sex offenders are dealt with by criminal law, not by civil law. And we shouldn't be changing policies because there are a small number of people who are both trans and sex offenders, because that's going to be minuscule. A bit like my Tesco security tag example. We're not going to put security tags on everything just because very few people steal stuff from Tesco's. Similar examples existed after 9/11, where Islam and terrorism were associated one another, when just because somebody is a Muslim does not mean that they are an extremist. And the ones that do will be dealt with by criminal law, because the average innocent trans folk is just trying to access the bathroom for the gender they recognise themselves to be. Another strawman example I see a lot of is that trans people are trying to gain a competitive advantage in sport. I'm a runner, I have great time running, lots of mindful moments there. And Park Run is a weekly run that happens on Saturdays, and there was a lot of controversy because the times were all stuck up on the website. There was controversy because one of the record holders was a trans athlete, and there was outrage that this person could take the female record. Park Run have been working for a while to try and take away the competitiveness of who can run 5k in the fastest possible times. And part of that has been removing the leaderboards from the website, which coincided with this whole thing around some of the women times being from trans people. And so this added to the stigma and belief that trans people are trying to get ahead in sport. Similarly, we had the Olympics last summer, and there were loads of posts with different athletes who were either trans or suspected possibly of being trans, with statements saying that they were trying to gain this competitive advantage, that they were using their gender to try and get ahead. I've stuck up a statistic from the International Olympic Committee that shows that this is actually affecting 1 in every 100,000 athletes. It's not a common thing in the Olympics. And again, just like I discussed with criminal law, this shouldn't apply to general trans rights. We're talking about a very small, minuscule amount of people who are pro-athletes and may or may not be trying to use gender or their sex to gain advantage. This is a straw man, because if I ask you, do you think the Olympics should be as fair as possible? You will of course say yes. And then the straw man gets extended to say that trans people shouldn't be allowed to exist because they're trying to gain some unfair advantage. I mean, I don't think trans people do have an advantage. I think they face an awful lot of oppression and difficulties. I think again it's going to be a minute percentage of people who are changing their sex just to get ahead on sports. Really? Would people go through that? Wow. And if it is an issue, let the Olympic Committee decide. Let their laws govern it, in the same way that in my previous point, let criminal law govern sex offenders. Are you athletic? Like I said, I run a tiny bit, but are you a pro athlete? Is this really a concern for you? It's a straw man. The average trans person isn't trying to gain some advantage that they didn't previously have. They don't feel at home in their body. They're trying to transition into the body where they feel comfortable, not to win competitions and trophies. Another straw man I hear is that trans people are trying to oppose your rights as a cisgendered individual, or transgendered people are trying to brainwash children. Again, a straw man. Every human being wants to be able to have rights, to be free, to not be restrained, have our liberty taken away from us. And we all agree that children need to be protected, particularly from brainwashing. Is that what's happening here? If we put reasonable adaptations to work with any protected characteristic, Let's say, for example, we have a cinema up on the second floor of a building and we want that building to be accessible for disabled people, so we put a stair lift into it. Someone might say, oh, the stairs aren't as wide anymore because there's a stair lift, so you're opposing my rights to get up the stairs. Well, you're not. You're actually just working on inclusion for another people group. Inclusion doesn't take away people's rights, it extends rights to other people. There might be a perception that if we work on inclusion for trans people, it might take away from cisgendered people's rights. But really what we're talking about is inclusion for another group rather than exclusion for the in-group. Inclusion isn't easy, but that doesn't mean it's taking away from our rights. It might be a practical thing, for example, what signs we put on our toilets. Inclusion also means facing our prejudices. Are we in any way transphobic? Because in order to be inclusive, we need to face those parts of ourselves, as uncomfortable as they might be. We need to face them wholeheartedly, openly, and then we can begin to recognise it and move past it rather than chucking it on other people because we're too afraid to admit our own prejudices. Back to our straw man. Sure, maybe there are small examples of trans people trying to take away the rights of cisgender people, but again, I think it's disproportionate. In the same way, maybe there are children who are being gaslit or brainwashed into being told that they are trans and this is woke and cool and you should embrace trans identity. But I think the bigger thing are probably thousands and thousands of children over the years who have actually not been at home in their bodies and have been gaslit or brainwashed into actually your trans identity isn't valid. When the telescope was first invented and they could look up into the sky and see the stars, did the people go, wow, loads of stars have been created? No, you've just got different technology so that you can see the sky better. In the same way, if there is more acceptance of a protected characteristic, lo and behold, that protected characteristic goes up. In the last 20 years in autism, for example, there has been a lot more acceptance and validation of the female presentation, the internalised presentation of autism, which is often more social and subtle than the male presentation. Have we suddenly gained a lot of female autists? No, they've always been there, they've just not been called autistic. They were just masking a shit ton before. So, to summarise where we've got to up until now, many of the arguments that are anti-trans are actually just transphobic or logical fallacies, strawmen, which are looking at very small proportions of people in order to make wide claims which don't represent the average trans person. I've looked at 4 arguments. Firstly, that trans people are trying to get into the bathroom they're not allowed into, and that taken to an extreme is logicking that all trans people are sex offenders. Secondly, that trans people are trying to gain a competitive advantage, specifically in sport, which taken to an extreme is saying that all trans people are cheaters. Thirdly, that trans people are trying to take away your rights by looking for inclusion, which taken to an extreme is saying that trans people are a threat. And fourthly, that trans people are trying to brainwash children to recruit them into their cult, which taken to an extreme is saying that trans people are manipulative. And although these articles and posts, news stories, etc. may appear as though they're focused on one group, focus on the fact that they're applying to trans people is having a subtle message that trans people are sex offenders, cheaters, a threat to your rights, and manipulative towards children. My summary is that these are strawmen, misrepresenting the trans community based on a couple of individuals or scenarios, some of which have been exaggerated, disproportioned, or completely made up. The average trans person has gone through quite the ordeal in order to be recognised and accepted. They're not looking to in any way interfere with the rest of humanity or take away or be a threat. They just want to exist and be accepted for the gender they recognise themselves to be. So when you see other anti-trans propaganda, look at it deeper. Don't just take it on face value. Ask yourself, is this talking about the trans community as a whole, or is this talking about a specific individual or a example that might not actually be the case? Is it a straw man? And also be aware of straw men in other oppressive media. For example, if you see posts about Muslims campaigning for Sharia law or protesting because they don't want Christmas to happen, then maybe this has happened, but I think again this is a minuscule portion of people. Or when you see the posts about refugees coming in carrying expensive mobile phones, again, think about what that's saying. It's having a message that's saying refugees are wealthy. Is that the case? As a bonus, I'll leave you with 3 additional logical fallacies. If you Google logical fallacies, you will find many more of them. The first is ad hominem arguments. That's where you attack the person rather than attacking the point. So you might say, Boris Johnson's ideas for COVID were wrong because he has silly hair, when actually herd immunity was bad because of the science. Or you might say, Simon's a counsellor, he's left wing, therefore this is why he's made this video and it's going to gain in popularity. If anything, I think I'll probably lose subscribers over this. And my political view shouldn't be the thing that determines whether you believe this video or not, or if you were to say, I'm not going to trust Simon because he's going grey at the sides. Ad hominem arguments, attacking the person. You might see anti-trans ad hominem arguments. A common thing might be posts on social media of somebody who was born male and is early on in their trans journey. They are discovering their style, they're experimenting with the use of makeup, they might be wearing clothing that matches their gender more closely. But this person is just beginning their trans journey, they haven't started any hormone treatments yet. And you might see posts on social media about a person like this who looks much more male than the female gender they're transitioning onto. And you'll see critical posts against this person with the underlying message kind of coming across of, you don't look like a woman, therefore you are wrong to be transitioning. I was thinking about this on the walk into work, and it kind of brought me to tears a little bit. What a horrible thing to say. I mean, can you imagine if you don't feel at home in your gender and you had plucked up the courage in order to start dressing in a way that feels natural to you, to start experimenting with makeup, to start embracing your identity, and then your picture gets plastered on the internet and people criticise you for the way you look? This is a slightly unrelated point, a logical fallacy called a red herring. But a year ago today, I released my first ever video on YouTube. There was no background music, it was all in one take, it was filmed on a screen using Zoom. The quality was much less because my editing skills weren't good and I was nervous. It was my first ever video. And I just think about how absolutely crippled I would feel if I got a whole host of really negative comments saying, Simon, that video is awful, you should stop creating. So that's really horrible. It's really mean if somebody is being brave enough to dress in a way that feels comfortable to them and they're getting the message that that's wrong because they're at the start of their journey. It's cruel. The next bonus logical fallacy I have are either or arguments, which is where you take a broad spectrum of answers and you simplify it into 2 binary black and white choices. For example, you might say you either recycle or otherwise you want the world to burn, when actually you might be fairly positively minded when it comes to green policy, but for some reason you don't recycle. There's a whole spectrum. To apply this to LGBTQ plus rights, you might have heard people say something on the lines of you are either an ally or an enemy. And that puts people into two camps. You're either what sounds like enthusiastically campaigning for equal rights, or otherwise you're against it. To paraphrase a famous quote, all that it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. But I don't think it is a binary, you're either pro or anti-trans. I think actually there are a huge spectrum of people who are undecided, indifferent, unaware, and if we say that you're either an ally or an enemy, this can be problematic because it puts a lot of people in the middle of this spectrum who are unsure to think, I'm not proactively pro-trans rights, so maybe I'm an enemy. And it might just push people towards far right that really aren't there, they're more indecisive. And then my final bonus logical fallacy, as much as I want to keep going with more of them, is to talk about the bandwagon or the ad populum arguments. And really that's saying you should vote this way, you should do this thing because everyone else is doing it. It's herd mentality. And with these trans examples, I think there is a lot of community, a lot of outrage on both sides. So my suggestion would be, don't be persuaded by whatever the newspaper you read is saying or the agendas of the Equality Act after it was subtly changed on the 16th. Just because something is popular, just because there seem to be more oppressive trans practices coming in, doesn't mean that we have to agree with something. Take time to reflect, look out for fallacies and see where you stand. Have a look, have a think. Is this a thing I actually believe? Am I anti-trans? Or is it more that there's a rhetoric going around that I'm kind of sucking up or being absorbed with? Think about the average trans person who is just trying to be accepted for the gender they are. Are they really so bad? Or has it been swamped up with arguments and rhetorics? Thank you so much for listening to this. I haven't posted that much on LGBTQ plus issues, and it might be that some of my terminology is outdated. If so, I would love to know. Feel free to drop something in the comments, but be compassionate. I'm learning. I have an attitude of wanting to be an ally and affirming. And if you want to put any other comments, any thoughts, any reflections, any comments on the reality and the fallacies that you see, then again, feel free to pop those down in the comments. But please do bear in mind that any comment is out in the public domain and everyone can see it and click on a link to see your own YouTube channel. I am a counsellor. I work one-to-one in Oxford or remotely and online with people. The thing that really gets my heart going, I guess my niche, is working with people who blame themselves. And those people that blame themselves have usually introjected that from society, have somehow thought that there's something wrong or defective with them when there isn't. They're pretty bloody great. And so I think that's why my heart goes out to these trans issues after seeing the changes to the Equality Act and just chatting to some mates that have been affected by it. It's heartbreaking. So thank you again for listening. I've got some more videos scripting and planned on autism and also some videos on video game addiction that I'm hoping to release at some point. Keep safe, keep affirming people. Let's just really love each other and show each other the respect we all deserve. Bye.